Welcome to Trends with Benefits, an award-winning podcast by Van Eck with a forward-looking perspective. We explore new ways of thinking about the markets, work, and life. Here's your host, Ed Lopez.
Anne, welcome to Trends with Benefits.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure to be here today.
The pleasure's all mine because I think I'm going to go for some free legal advice. No, I think that the topic that we're going to be talking about, estate planning and trust and wills and trends therein, I think is really interesting. And I hope our listeners find it interesting as well, particularly given kind of the digitization of our world and in particular that space as well, which I think is the angle that you're coming from today. So welcome, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you for having me. And I will tell you, Ed, that I used to bill at $1,000 per hour almost. So if you're really looking for legal advice, just be aware that this time is precious.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, good. Hopefully I can ask the right questions for everybody's benefit, and then we can send the bill to Jan Van Eck. How about that?
Exactly.
Okay. I am speaking with Ann Rhodes, Chief Legal Officer at Wealth.com. And as you just may have heard, we're going to be talking about estate planning and things related to that and the trends going on in that world. But, as a way of kind of leading into it, I also found it interesting, Ann, that you are a fellow podcaster. You're a co-host of The Practical Planner. I thought that might be a decent segue into our topic as a way to just kind of get started. But also, a lot of our audience is also financial planners and financial advisors who may be thinking about podcasting or heard about that as a good way of expanding their business. And I just, as a fellow podcaster, somebody who kind of really started this during COVID and started doing it from home and what have you, have different experiences. I'm just kind of curious what your experience has been, kind of what you've learned from podcasting, and why did you get started in the first place in doing that for your business?
Yeah, I mean, I will be honest here. The podcast idea came about because I was in private practice for so long. And I think that, as I hinted before, when you are a financial advisor, you refer a client to an estate planner and they start working with your client, any conversation could end up being billed to the client. And so you're very judicious about sort of what kind of questions you ask the attorney. And maybe if you're particularly friendly, they won't bill you, but there's still, you use your questions judiciously, right? You're not going to ask maybe the most basic things. And so really the idea for the podcast came about because Wealth.com works primarily with financial advisors. And so we have Thomas Kopelman, who is the head of community for us. And the two of us just had a really good rapport. So we figured, why don't we take this show on the road? Thomas asked me questions sometimes, I'm seeing this kind of trust. A client just walked in with this question, how should I think about this? And we realized, as Thomas and I are getting to know each other and asking each other professional questions over cups of coffee virtually, we should just turn on the camera and record. Yeah. And so that's sort of how the Practical Planner came to be. And I have to say that is one of the best parts of my job. I was a teacher before I went into law, and I just love being able to share what I've accumulated as knowledge for free because I just think it's important, it's an exercise in sort of making sure that people have a good baseline for understanding what they're talking about. And so, it's like that imposter syndrome, you're kind of in the sandbox and there's some concepts maybe you're still unclear about. The podcast is really meant to demystify those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. You guys cover a lot of great topics, and some gives listeners different things to think about. I learned a few things on a recent podcast as well. A lot of different acronyms too, like RATs and things like that.
Yes. This is like an alphabet soup part of the law, for sure.
Yeah. What's great about it too, and we'll talk more about this as well in terms of estate planning and the various tools that could be brought to bear in this field. The podcast, I think, makes it so much more approachable and tangible and as opposed to something that's out there that maybe you've never really had the benefit of experiencing before or doing before.
Exactly. And we've gotten really good feedback on it. And so I'm just happy to be here on your podcast and hopefully imparting some of that knowledge too.
Maybe we could start out just generally in estate planning. I kind of alluded to it what are some of the biggest, say, misconceptions or obstacles do you think that people face when just even thinking about estate planning?
Yeah, I mean, this is, a big question because my company actually did a study to try to figure out, what drives people to do estate planning. We all know the statistics. I think most Americans, don't have an estate plan. Every American should have an estate plan. And I think it's something like 2/3 of Americans don't have an estate plan. So what leads to that, huge gap? And as it happens, most people do it because somebody tells them to. Somebody wags their finger at them, reminds them that this is something they should do because number one, nobody wants to think about their deaths. Number two, it seems so expensive, especially when, attorneys have a vested interest in making sure everybody who needs an estate plan comes through them and they bill for their time. And then, I think number three, it's just one of those things that seems to be easy to put off. Taxes have a deadline. You have to file your income tax returns by April 15th. But if there was no deadline, I'm sure everybody would just never do it. And so that it has that feeling to it of like, ugh, I lived another day. I'm fine. Like, I don't need to do it. And so I think the misconceptions are that it's costly and it takes a lot of time. And right now, what I can say about that misconception is there are plenty of tools out there to make sure that you have at least something in place, right? Ideally, of course, you'd have a very high quality estate plan that provides for, all the contingencies in the world. Ideally, you wouldn't put it aside for 20 years, but if you had to, at least you've thought about, those questions. But, I've always told my clients, and I had clients who walked in with millions of dollars into my office, and they just wanted something before they all went on vacation. And they were afraid, what happens if we're on a boat or a plane and, it goes under? And I said, well, we could sit down and do this for 2 months, asking you all these detailed questions, but at least have, a will, a placeholder, name some guardians for your kids, just do it, and then come back to my office and we'll do the whole package. So having something in place is better than nothing. That's the bottom line.
Is a misconception also just you have to be really super wealthy?
I'm so glad that you addressed that one. The elephant in the room. So when we say, all Americans should have an estate plan, the answer, of course, is no. You don't have to just be wealthy, whatever that means to you, to have an estate plan in place. Here are a couple of examples. Number one, you may live in a state like where I live in California, or let's say Florida, where actually, you want to have a trust to be able to bypass probate. Probate is a court process where if somebody passes away with either a will or just nothing at all, right? Like that's what we call intestacy. Like you just didn't have an estate plan at all. Probate kicks in to decide, who's going to be in charge of determining where your assets go, who's going to receive them, and how, and there's a judge that, oversees that process. That process can be really, really slow in certain states. Some states not so, but if you're in one of these states, please go and have an estate plan made, particularly a trust-based one, because your assets could be held up by the court for up to 2 years sometimes. So your beneficiaries are kind of just like stuck having to talk to the court all the time to get, and especially if your loved ones depend on you and your assets, it can be a really, really horrible process. Number two is just, if you pass away without anything, then there are intestacy laws. Again, that word comes back, intestacy. So those intestacy laws kick in and they'll determine where your assets go, who the hierarchy, the waterfall of who should be your loved ones, who should get your assets. And if you think about it, you're basically letting a legislature from your state decide who depends on you. And those legislatures may not have revised those laws for 40 years, in some cases. And of course, they have this nuclear American family in mind, it's like spouse, otherwise kids, otherwise parents, and they go down the line. So you're basically saying, hey, I'm okay letting, some people I've never met before who've probably passed away by now decide where my stuff goes. So you've lost an opportunity to determine where your assets will go. So no, it is not based on, wealth. It is very much based on your family situation. Each of us has special situations in our families that make an estate plan useful to have.
And I guess I'm learning there's a lot of different types of trust that you could set up kind of depending on your situation. I set one up myself for it's a revocable trust. And one of the struggles that I had was really understanding how to use it. And I wonder if you've come across that. And not only that, not only my own struggles of like, okay, do I open up this brokerage account under the trust or this bank account, or which ones do I flip over? But even going to the banks and showing them the trust document, the bank reps didn't know what the heck to do with this. Like, oh, I don't know if you can open up this account under a trust name.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about trusts, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. And if anything, I think most people think I need to have a lot of money to have a trust. And like I said before, actually, if you live in certain states, like you should just de facto have a trust to privatize the process, to try to take it away from the public, court-led process called probate. But so the baseline, to have an estate plan, there are two main vehicles that determine what happens to your assets upon death. And then there are some subtleties between them. But the first one is the will. And I think most people have kind of like that's entered popular, knowledge, like Taylor Swift sings about her will. And then you have this trust. This particular trust that we're talking about, where it could be a substitute for a will, an alternative to the will. This is exactly the kind of trust you're talking about, Ed. This is the revocable trust. We'll set aside for now irrevocable trusts. They're just their own beasts. They're usually tax-driven objectives for those. But here we're just talking about you just need to tell everybody, society, your loved ones, what happens to your stuff. You're choosing between a will-based plan versus a trust-based plan and a revocable-based plan. So this is where, Ed, to your point, it feels like you complicate things by having the trust. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you, oh, it's just as easy as a will. That's not necessarily true, because you just highlighted one of the biggest differences between a will and a trust. The will only kicks in once you pass away. But the trust actually can start owning things on your behalf as soon as you've signed it and as soon as you started putting assets into it. So this is where a lot of financial advisors and estate planners will tell you, as soon as you have this like cool new vehicle called the trust, start putting things into it. It will help you bypass probate, privatize things, etc. But there are limitations. The first one being that there are some assets that you just can't put into a revocable trust while you're alive. So this is like, typically it's the 401ks, the IRAs. Like if you are the owner of them, they're not inherited, but you just, were the employee who worked and earned them. You can't actually transfer them into the trust. Then there are also just like things that become a little clunkier, because banks all of a sudden have to verify that your trust exists. You have the powers of them that you say you do. They want to know the tax identification number, which is usually your own social security number. So like there are just all these questions that arise. But if you wrap your head around those kind of the paperwork, a little bit of the administrative, stuff that comes with a trust, the reason why they're so powerful to have is because they provide for incapacity in case something happens to you. They are a much more powerful vehicle than a financial power of attorney to get your stuff done if something happened to you. In that case, it's really critical for you to have a trust and to try to put your business interests into the trust so somebody can just step into your shoes, no ball gets dropped, and boom, they keep going.
This is kind of a random question, but it is pertinent because it's actually relevant to me. You have to update these things periodically. Say you move and maybe you want to update who things go to or whatever. But the trust, they don't get filed with the state so that anybody can find it. They get, as a lawyer, you hang on to it, right?
Oh, so interesting. So trusts are private instruments. One of the advantages is privacy, right? Remember, if you pass away with a will or without anything, there's a probate, a public court process that's open for you. And one of the big advantages of trust is you get to privatize that process by putting it in the hands of a trustee. So interestingly, most states, unless you're dealing with real estate inside the trust, you do not have to record anything. In fact, with a trust, usually if you do end up having to record, meaning put something into the public, searchable databases, You can do a cover sheet for that trust. So you don't have to disclose like all 30 pages of that document because that contains a lot of private stuff. And so instead, they allow you to file something called a certificate of trust or a memorandum of trust, which states the basic facts of the trust, really doesn't put a lot of, the private information out there. And that's what you file with your deed or whatever else you need to do to record with the county. So yes, don't worry about, I really can't think of a time when my clients had to divulge the contents of their full trust.
So let's say I'm working with an attorney who's close to retirement. And what happens when he retires? What happened to and then I pass away? I've got to make sure that my executors or whoever beneficiaries know where to go. But if he's no longer around, who has the physical documents? It's got to where does it sit? Who can prove?
Darn those attorneys who have to sleep, who take vacation, who eventually get older and retire and pass away themselves. What the heck? So this is an interesting question. So I'll get a little bit technical here. Your attorney, if that is the case, has a duty to make sure that they close, their engagements with you in a manner that makes you feel like you know what your next step is, right? So I'll give you actually an example about this, but most attorneys who are just retiring, they know they'll stop practicing. There's a system where they start closing their books of business, right? And you might get a letter, to formally close the engagement. They should be turning over all the files to you. So to your earlier question about the trust agreement, you can keep that yourself. Ideally, your attorney or you have the reason why attorneys like to keep their originals is because clients lose them. But there's nothing to stop you from saying, it will sit in a binder on my shelf as opposed to your shelf. And also, it's nice for the attorney because you are guaranteed to come back to them when something happens. So they get to bill some more. But anyways, but I will tell you, sometimes it's not that nice. So the very first job that I had as a trust and estates attorney was at McDermott, Will & Emery. It is the premier law firm, big law firm in the trust and estate space. And I worked from their New York office, and a partner who's actually quite famous passed away really suddenly of cancer. Don't know why he hadn't started that process, but he passed away with all these clients, book of business still open. He was actually trustee on a lot of his clients' trusts. He was one of those really old school attorneys who, became so close to his clients, and these were very wealthy folk, that they trusted him with the money, if that makes sense. It's very rare these days to have that kind of attorney relationship. But so we, the law firm, had to take over and start closing his books. And that took, I want to say, a year and a half for the law firm to finally get all the signatures they needed to close trust accountings. Appoint new trustees, the whole thing. So ideally, your attorney would be a little bit better prepared. One of the trends right now that we're seeing in estate planning is there's an aging population. It's not just the attorneys, it's the clients, right? And so you have your baby boomers, silent generation that are passing away. All the financial planners are talking about the great wealth transfer. And that touches not only you guys in the, wealth management business or you in the estate planning business, right? It's all of this is interconnected. There's also a lot about elderly care where folks are going to have to figure out how do we take care of this aging population? Sometimes they don't have loved ones to step in and help them, drive them to appointments or take care of their, taxes or whatnot. And so this is all a big trend.
And so you can plan for that. You can I think the sandwich generation is a great example of where somebody my age or whatever, where you have aging parents and you may have kids and you're doing all of these different things. That aging parent thing is actually pretty relevant too. You've seen vehicles set up to kind of help in that regard?
Yes, for sure. So aging parents, if you are in the sandwich generation or your clients are in the sandwich generation, here are a couple of things to take away as you're thinking about estate planning. Number one is, does that aging parent have an estate plan? Not only to provide for smooth transition upon death of their assets and, their financial affairs, but also for incapacity, right? With the advent of modern technology, medical technology, people can be, have a very slow decline. It's kind of a gray area at what point in time they can't take care of themselves anymore. You have questions about like nursing home and end of life support. Like, how do they feel about quality of life? What does it mean for them? All of these kinds of questions you can address through an estate plan to at least just give some clarity to the people who have to make some really tough decisions. The other thing to think about is also, do you have enough assets that you might have a taxable estate? So yes, there's a certain threshold. It depends, at federal level, it's really, really high right now, 13.61 million. But at the state level, your own, home state, it could be much lower. So think Oregon, $1 million. So if you have a taxable estate, your parents may be infusing with the inheritance you're receiving. They might be contributing and worsening your own taxable issues. So maybe by doing a little bit of estate planning, your parents could actually set up one of these irrevocable trusts that we hinted at for you to receive your inheritance in a more tax efficient manner. So that's with the generation above. And then you think you're in the sandwich generation, there's a generation below you. That generation below, just make sure that you take care of your kids once they turn 18, that you're still there legally to be able to take care of them. We have all sorts of new laws now, HIPAA, right? Or not new, but people are starting to become more aware of them. So HIPAA, privacy laws, your kids, once they turn 18, you think it's business as usual. They're still your kid. You're still paying for their lifestyle. They're going off to college. But actually, they get all these legal rights where all of a sudden now you may be locked out of having the information you need to be able to make decisions for them.
Well, tell me about wealth.com and what you guys are doing to help modernize this space. I think that may go a long way to helping convince people or getting people off their duffs to perhaps do something.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about what we're doing at Wealth. Bottom line is we want to put really high quality estate planning documents in the hands of more people, but also put technology in their hands, software, to be able to say, hey, I have an existing estate plan. I really liked my lawyer. I got this done. And being able to understand what is in their estate plan. So I'll give you a funny example. One of my colleagues recently was like, it's an employee benefit here for me to be able to do my wealth estate plan. And I had a lawyer do it 10 years ago, but now I want to update it. So he's going through the motions, filling out the forms. And then all of a sudden he was like, I wonder what decisions I made in my old estate plan. And he was like, I don't know. Now I have to read a 30, 40-page document, my trust, and I don't know how to read it. I'm not a lawyer, right? And so for him, it was this like interesting experience because, Wealth can actually kind of visualize that for him. So you can ingest a PDF. Your lawyer probably didn't go through the trouble of like putting together a PowerPoint with like nice boxes showing you like how things flow, but Wealth can do that for you. So he just uploaded, his estate plan, visualized it and was like, oh, now I remember this is who I picked for my executor. And this is, how the flow goes. And so he was able to make the few updates that he really wanted, to reflect the past 10 years of his life. And so that's the kind of like tooling that we want to put in the hands of people. So it's visual as well as, the actual documents. And people, especially, the millennials, Gen Zers, they're used to solving their problems online. The first thing they do is Google something. And pretty soon, I'm sure they'll just ask ChatGPT as their first reflex, right? And so this is a generation that doesn't necessarily want their first step to be calling an attorney. And so what do you do with that? We don't want to replace attorneys. We actually think attorneys, I was an attorney, have a really important role to play in the trust and estates industry and that ecosystem. But there are folks who they're not going to go to an attorney. So you might as well put something in their hands that will take care of their families. It's better than nothing.
And you're working with individuals as well as advisors as well. Do you interface with advisors?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about kind of our business. We are strictly a B2B2C business. So if you are listening and like, oh, I want to go check out wealth.com, I just want to do my estate plan there, you can't actually sign up to have an account just off the street. So instead, we very much work with financial advisors primarily, a little bit like insurance companies, et cetera, some employee benefits actually also. but you have to have a relationship, some sort of referral to the wealth platform. Part of that is because we very much want somebody to be there to kind of keep you accountable, to be honest, or to have introduced you to the idea of estate planning. We think it's very important because, that's how most people end up doing their estate plan. And for us, having somebody like the financial advisor be there to kind of help somebody even think through why they need an estate plan, we think is really important. So that's part of the reason we do it. But yeah, so you can, as a financial advisor, you're welcome to come and check out wealth.com, request a demo. We'd be happy to, jump on Zoom or whatever and demo the platform for you.
So this next question is one I ask every guest. It's about long-term trends, and it can be about estate planning, and maybe it's a helpful one to kind of see what's really just top of mind for you, but it's also an opportunity for you to mention anything else. So what's one long-term trend you see playing out over the next year or several years?
I hinted at this before, but I really do think elderly care is going to be really important. I hear a lot about, startups, established companies that are, and actually employers, like companies that just employ, a workforce that's becoming older. This is I think a huge potential headache for society, having a lot of elderly folk who need help managing their financial and medical affairs and not knowing where to turn to. I see this also as an opportunity, to be honest, where, a financial advisor who knows a client very well can get ahead of that conversation. Think not only of the client, the client almost like as an individual unit, but actually also of the couple, right? If you're working with a couple, chances are they're not going to pass away together and somebody will be left behind. What happens to the widow or widower? Start thinking about that and planning with them. I think this is an area that's going to need society to come together and really figure out what we do for our elderly population. I worry a lot about elderly abuse as well. So, you read about these atrocious cases all the time, people who come in, have no relationship to, this very vulnerable individual who file a piece of paper with the court, announcing themselves as conservator, guardian, and then all of a sudden, poof, just wasting away this person's assets for their own gain. I worry a ton about that becoming more prevalent. And so I encourage folks to actually also think about what we can do to have, ethical, professional, individual fiduciaries whose sole job it is to step into this space and help an elderly person who has no kids, no spouse, or maybe the spouse predeceased them, to be able to just step in and help them. And that could just be a whole business. I'm always asked, what happens if I can't have a corporate trustee? Corporate trustees are too expensive. They tend to charge, AUM or something like that, a percentage on AUM. And I'm like, oh, well, you could do this professional individual fiduciary, this person, and there are just not enough of them. And so I encourage us as a society to think about what we do to help elderly folk.
Yeah, there's got to be some better ways of helping the elderly out. And yeah, you just kind of jogged a thought in my head. And I kind of wish my folks still worked with a financial advisor, because they could be that independent third party between me and them a little bit. For instance, they have each other's beneficiary on medical power of attorneys, financial power of attorneys, things of that sort. I'm second. And if one predeceases the other, they're more at an advanced age. And I'm like, I really should be the one doing that for you. And it'd be helpful if somebody else could just tell them that, hand it over to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have situations too, and these are really unfortunate, but I've had clients where siblings start to fight too. And either before death or after death, it depends on what the issue is, the sensitivities. But this is where, as an attorney, you actually say to the family, listen, I think all of you guys are conflicted. You're just going to keep fighting with each other. And so this is where we need that neutral party to step in and to, do it in the best interest of the parent, even if they don't know the parent. But at least it takes you guys out of the equation, so you're not fighting with each other and you can go back to having Thanksgiving together, And so, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of those kinds of issues.
Awesome. You want to try trend or fads or speed rounds? Must be kind of fun.
Yeah, let's do it.
Artificial intelligence, trend or fad?
I knew it was coming. It's a trend.
I probably know the answer to this one too. Cryptocurrency, trend or fad?
I want to say fad, but this is just like a personal thing. But I think it is a trend as well.
Centenarians, living to 100, trend or fad?
Fad. I worry that quality of life, that there are upper bounds to what technology can do, and that quality of life is not always going to be trending upward. Personally, I hope I don't live to 100.
Not unless I'm like Benjamin Button and start to get younger, but...
Right. Okay, if they do invent that technology, I'll stick around.
Yeah. By the way, do you have pets?
I do. They're strange pets.
Okay. Like,
my husband has pufferfish and I have a leopard gecko.
Oh, all right. They are strange pets. Okay. Well, the next question was kind of random too. It's personalized pet nutrition.
That's a trend. And I think it's very specific actually to our country, by the way. I grew up in France. The pets there don't live as nicely as we do here.
I know. They're pampered here. Tell me about it. We just got a puppy like 8 months ago, and she's on all this special diet and all this stuff, and treat her like a kid. It's crazy. It's almost not even worth asking, but luxury senior living, trend or fad?
I want to say fad. It gets more expensive to retire. There will always be the, 0.1 percenters, et cetera, who have the money to surround themselves with the staff and the help that they need so that they can stay in their own homes. So I just don't know for whom those things are, to be honest.
Concierge doctors, trend or fad?
I think it's a trend. I think people are fed up with the medical healthcare system in the U.S., insurance, all of that. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of folks who want to seek an alternative to it.
Yeah, just navigating the whole medical insurance system and actually even just trying to get an appointment with a doctor, which like months out is really tough. It's frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, Anne, thank you very much for your time and your insights. What's the best way for people to learn more about you, connect with you, learn about wealth.com?
I mean, you're welcome to follow me and chat with me on my LinkedIn, first of all. So that's probably the best place. You can also come to the wealth.com platform at some point in, the demo process. They might just have me drop in and say hi. And I'm always happy to answer questions about estate planning in general, about what I do at Wealth, about anything, honestly. And so feel free to get in touch.
And catch the Practical Planner. I caught it on Spotify. I got to say, I'm a little jealous because you guys also have the video on Spotify. We got to figure out how to do that for our own podcast.
That's the magic my marketing team does. I just show up, try to look pretty, try to sound smart, and that's all I do.
Well, fantastic. Again, thank you very much for being on the show. And thank you, listener, for tuning in to another episode of Trends with Benefits.